Simon Woodroffe is the founder and creative driving force behind the Yo super brand. He left school at just 16, worked as a roadie, a stage designer and a television executive, all before he decided to go into business for himself at the age of 40. He spent 2 years setting up Yo Sushi and in 1997 opened his first conveyor belt sushi restaurant here on Poland Street. Now Yo Sushi became an overnight phenomenon and has since continued to grow both at home and abroad. And it's paved the way for many other Yo projects under the umbrella name Yo Everything Else, which Simon hopes will rival the most famous of super brands like Easy and Virgin. So tell us, how did you first come up with the idea for Yo Sushi?
I was sitting in a restaurant with a guy I knew from the TV business, a guy by the name of Mr. Uehara, at the age of 42, down in the dumps thinking, what am I going to do? Going out to the world to find out, to ask people their advice, what could I do, And we were eating sushi. And I said, what about sushi? I love sushi, and it's always so expensive in London. And there was a bit of a sort of oriental silence, and he was obviously thinking. And my dad always used to say, wait till the silence ends. So I let him have a bit of space, and he looked up from the silence. He said, what you should do, Simon, he said, is a conveyor belt sushi bar with girls in black PVC miniskirts. And that's exactly what he said. In that moment, I remember thinking to myself, it was a sort of eureka moment, because I didn't know what they were. I'd never heard of conveyor belt sushi bars. In my sort of, schoolboy brain, it was like having the electric train set going around the dining room table, delivering the marmalade in the morning, and I went back and found out, and 2 years later I opened the first Yo Sushi in Poland Street.
You left school quite early at the age of 16. How would you say that's affected your career progression?
Well, when you leave school at 16, especially if you were brought up in sort of, rather sort of English upper middle class. Not a great deal of money. My father was a senior army officer, and my mum was a sort of virgin on the aristocratic, that is. And so, one was expected, and this was sort of, the hippie days at the end of the 60s, when we used to do peace signs and mean them and all of that, and I left school at 16, and, you weren't supposed to do that really in those days. But after a couple of halcyon years, doing everything that we did in those days, I do remember thinking that my dad was sort of right, and having a bit of money did oil the wheels of life, and with no qualifications to fall back on, you think, well, what can I do? So I lived on my wits, and I got a job as a roadie, and then I became a stage designer and various things, but I was always looking how to earn a living because I was unemployable effectively. So how did it affect me, not having any qualifications? Absolutely enormously. It's dictated the entire pattern of my life because, if I'd been from the East Ender, I would have had to duck and dive, the duck and divers. So yes, it was, I think, of people, there are statistics that of people who leave school with 2 O-levels, 2 GCSEs, I think 30% go on to make success of their lives, and 70 probably don't, depending on how you judge that. So I wouldn't recommend it as a course, but if you have got some motivation and you're willing to go out and do it, it is certainly a big driver.
You've had a rather colourful past, some might say. Would you say that's helped you, touring with the likes of the Rolling Stones, to then be successful in your business?
Well, I was a bus conductor. I worked in a factory making Milky-Vit, which is powdered milk for cows. I never told anybody that, actually. That's an exclusive for you. And I was, and then I got a job in the theatre, and then I was a roadie, and I did lots of things, and I went out on tour with a lot of the rock bands of the 70s, and about middle of the 70s, I remember we used to see these shows, and I'd be doing a spotlight or the lighting board or whatever it was, and I think if these could be big spectacles, these big shows, and I'd tell them my ideas, and eventually, actually Rod Stewart eventually picked up on one of them, and I did a big white stage for them. And I went from being the sort of lighting roadie and then the lighting designer to the stage designer, and this sort of new word was invented in a way. It was there right at the beginning of an industry, you know, who's the designer on this show? You know, you didn't used to have them before. You just used to have the bloke who did the lights, you know, and the whole thing grew up, and I grew up with it. And I did that till 85, which was the year of Live Aid, when I remember looking around thinking, you know, I've got to get out of this before I get found out, because I'd had no training, and I'd just done it. In fact, I'm very proud of what I did now, but the whole world grew up at that day, and that's when I went in to first, I became a television executive, really, sold the rights to rock music shows to TV stations, and then went on from there.
Why did you suddenly decide to go into business in your early 40s?
I remember thinking to myself, it was a sort of tear your hair out moment. I thought, I've completely forgotten to become a millionaire. And it was a sense of, I'm going to run out of time, which is why I'm a believer in people over 40, over 50, actually. They're very investable, because unless you do it now, you're going to run out of time. Restaurants are extremely high risk. You know, they're also extremely profitable if you get them right. And I think there was a dichotomy, because the rational side, the intelligent side of me, knew that restaurants were extremely high risk. But the emotional side, actually for 90% of the time in the 2 years that I put it together, actually believed that this could be an enormous success. I say could be because there was still probably a 5 or 10% and a moment at 4 o'clock in the morning on a cold winter's night that I'd wake up thinking, what am I doing? You know, putting everything I've got on the line, which is what I did. But no, emotionally, I believed it. I thought that it had a bloody good chance.
In 2006, you were awarded an OBE. Did you ever imagine that you'd be awarded something like that in your lifetime?
I've won lots of awards along the way, and I'm very proud. And I'm still quite proud of the OBE. Pity my mum didn't live to see it. She would have really loved it. But you get a letter when you get one of these things. In fact, Stelios told me that he had the same thing. And the letter's from this sort of rather old-fashioned department of the government in St James's, the controller or whatever it is of, you know, at Her Majesty's wishes, the Prime Minister has asked if you would be willing to accept this thing. It was always a lovely old-fashioned thing, accept the OB. And then at the top it says, if you're in agreement and would like Her Majesty to do this, please fill in the enclosed ethnicity form, which I thought is the, as if they don't know that I'm a white Caucasian, you know. I mean, it's so politically correct, isn't it? You know, as the old meets the new.
How important is branding in business?
All I know is what's important in our business, and yes, brand is enormously important, but you know, all brand is a reflection of how good you are at service, how good you are at design, how good you are at the quality of the product, the food or the hotel bed or whatever it is. So more and more, you know, it's been said so many times that all brand is a reflection of the substance of what it is. So I don't believe that brands can be invented by advertising agencies. I have to think that the modern brand has to reflect the true nature of the people and the individuals behind the brand.
How important is innovation to success?
I think you can have a corner shop, innovate nothing at all and make a big success out of it. Or you can have the most innovative idea in the world and make a failure of it. I personally like innovation. That's my little thing. I want to do innovation on a big scale, and I want it to be radical because that's the only way I feel safe. So I wouldn't make a statement saying innovation is important to every business. You can, you know, do something the same as somebody else and just do it much better, and you can do very, very well. But for me, innovation is, we have a thing we call CANI, C-A-N-I question mark, standing for constant and never-ending innovation. And gone are the days in my book where you can say, you know, we'll roll that out for the next 10 years. For us, every Yo Sushi we open, they've done something different.
So would you ever consider taking Yo Sushi to Japan?
I've talked about taking Yo Sushi to Japan for years, and there's so many things to do in the places we already are. People ask us, why did we do the first ever sushi abroad in Greece? Why have we done so many in the Middle East? The truth was that we never had a strategy to go to Greece, France and Middle East. They were opportunities that came up while we were extremely busy trying to get 50 restaurants going in the UK.
You appeared in the popular show Dragon's Den. How important would you say programmes of that kind are in encouraging entrepreneurship in the UK?
Oh, it's inspiring. It's inspiring. I mean, you hate The Apprentice, love The Apprentice, hate Dragon's Den, love Dragon's Den. You know, there are kids growing up in the school playgrounds who are no longer saying, I want to be a footballer like David Beckham or a model like Kate or whatever it is. They're growing up saying, I want to be one of those entrepreneurs. They're cool. And actually, what they do isn't that very clever, because I've seen those entrepreneurs on Dragon's Den, you know, the new ones that are coming in to pitch their ideas. They're not clever. I could do better than that. You know, so in that sense, it's all The Apprentice guys. It's not rocket science. So in that sense, it's exposed that business is common sense for the most part. And I think that you're going to see an awful lot more people leaving school thinking, I could go out and do something. You know, when you actually look at the risks inherent in having a career, of changing your careers, of doing things, you know, that thing that the careers officer told me when I was a kid, you can't go into business, 95% fail. You know, even if a large percentage do, it's not 95%, it's probably about 60 by the way, but you know, what they don't tell you is what happened to those individuals after the business failed, whether they bought them back and started them again, whether they started another business, whether they learnt from it and moved on. You know, the one thing that you see repeatedly among entrepreneurs is that most of them fail. In fact, the thing that everybody forgets is that entrepreneurs don't go, unsuccessful people, millionaires, don't go around succeeding all day. They're actually willing to be rejected, they're willing to fail, they're willing to be said no to, and they can dust themselves off without making it all personal.
So how do you make an idea work?
To make an idea happen, the first thing is what most people do, is they sit around going, shall I, shan't I, shall I, shan't I? And the answer is, don't decide, but start. You know, and start means, in this moment now, in this conversation with you, start talking about what my idea is. You know, people say, somebody will steal my idea. People don't steal ideas for the most part, not unless it's patentable. Get your notebook, start writing it out. And what I always do is I say, I have a ban on my brain. I call it the 3-second rule. 1, 2, 3. You are not allowed to think for more than 3 seconds about whether it's going to work, whether it's not going to work, whether you're going to do it, whether you're not going to do it. But instead, you put in a bit of money, put in a bit of research, you start doing it. You might have 2 or 3 things on the go. Another great idea is get rid of your TV set. Don't give up your day job, just get rid of your TV set. That means there's a whole lot of extra time in the day when you can actually get going and start working on your idea and run the 2 things in parallel. But most people think, oh, shall I do it? You don't need to make the decision. You know, 3 months later, you might decide to make the decision. 3 months, interesting period of time, nearly 100 days, you know, 1% improvement a day. And in 3 months, you know a great deal more about it. You're in a better position to make a decision.
What really drives you in business?
What drives me in business is the idea is really what drives me. The obsession with an idea, the obsession with wanting to see what it will actually look like, much more so than the desire for great wealth and pleasure. What also drives me is the fear of it all going wrong.
What advice would you give budding entrepreneurs out there?
I don't know. You ask me on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, or Friday, I'll tell you a different thing every day. But I will say that I never met anybody who went out to follow their dream and regretted it, regardless of whether they later succeeded or failed. But I met many, many people who looked back from later in their life and said, I wish I'd grasped that opportunity and taken a few more risks in my life and gone out to fulfill my dreams, because you only live once.